we decided to do something really radical. I mean, the topic of today's thing was supposed to be science and meditation. And we decided we're not going to do meditation. We're going to go straight into enlightenment, the meat of the matter. So today's topic is science and enlightenment. There's an echo. So my teacher, let me begin with the first question. Oh, by the way, Shinzhen is a star, and I'm just here to look good or something. So my teacher, you and I, we share a dream. And the dream we share is global enlightenment, which is to accelerate enlightenment, classical enlightenment, by between 2x to 10x. I say between 2 to 10 because 2 was his dream, 10 was my dream. Between 2 and 10x with technology. And when we say enlightenment, we mean enlightenment with a small e and not a big E. And specifically, there's a technical term for that, platform enlightenment, which is stream entry. So my teacher, my first question to you, can you explain stream entry?
Stream entry is a phrase in English. The first thing you should think when you encounter a Buddhist phrase in English is this is going to translate a term from Asian languages. And so you want to be able to go back to that original term, see how it's dealt with in the original text. So when we say stream entry in English, it corresponds to what's called sota apatti in the Pali language. Now, you may or may not know, but Pali is one of the classical languages of Buddhism. So the texts tell us that the defining characteristic, the main characteristic of a stream entry attainment is that a person realizes that there has never been a thing inside them called a self. So in traditional Buddhism, that's called insight into no self. That's the way it's described in the text. Different modern teachers are going to have different criteria for saying whether this person has gotten to the stage of being a stream enterer or not. So another thing you should keep in mind is that what one modern teacher might say, okay, you've attained stream entry, some other modern teacher, it might not make that teacher's bar. So there may be some variation among modern teachers. So now you know what the old text said. It's insight into no self. Modern teachers may have different standards among their students. Another thing you'd want to keep in mind is that this is not a peak experience. It's a paradigm shift. Once you know that a lunar eclipse is the Earth's shadow on the moon, you will never again believe that a monster is eating up the moon. Even though it sort of looks like a monster is eating up the moon, you can still sort of see the monster eating the moon poetically, but you will never truly believe that and freak out because a monster is eating the moon. You will know, oh, you have a different paradigm. In pre-science cultures, there can be the paradigm, an eclipse is a monster is ending the world and it's freak out time, or God's angry at us or something like that. A post-science paradigm, it's never going to be that. It's one celestial body eclipsing another, and there's no going back. Once you know that forever. So stream entry is an insight that latches. It's not a peak experience where you just got a little glimpse of something. It's like from that time on, you know for sure there's never been a thing called a self. However, the other thing I'd like you to bear in mind about stream entry is that the way I just described it is the way it's often described, like it's a sudden thing that happens to a person. But actually, in my experience, it more frequently gradually grows on a person, and they acclimatize to it, may not even quite realize how enlightened they've gotten. So that's another thing to know. Even though it's typically described as sudden, it may, in fact, in many cases, just sort of grow on you over time. But you'll still come to a place where you know for sure there's never been a thing called the self. The other thing I would say about it is that it maps on to similar experiences in other traditions outside of Buddhism. For example, how many people in this room know who Saint Teresa of Avila was? Just curious, okay? Maybe about a third of the people. If you read her, she was a 16th century Roman Catholic contemplative. If you read her Las Moradas, her book, The Interior Castle, you read an English translation, you'll be able to see that she went through various stages, and number 7, at the end of her life, obviously maps onto what Buddhists call stream entry. So we find it outside of Buddhism. In Buddhism, it tends to be parameterized by the number 0. You realize no self and emptiness. But in other traditions, it might be parameterized by infinity. You realize an infinite self or a large self. And yet in other traditions, for example, Taoism and Christianity, it's parameterized by the number 1. You realize the oneness of inside and outside, or the oneness in the Christian paradigm of the soul with God. But in all cases, something fundamental has happened with regards to your sense of identity. And it's permanent and there's no going back. Saint Teresa said that her abiding sense of oneness with God when she was just bopping around in the world being ordinary, her sense of oneness with God was so profound that it seemed as though the soul no longer existed. Well, that's right out of Buddhism. The last thing I'd like you to keep in mind is most people, if they get competent guidance, can come to this experience. That means it's feasible for most of you if you put in the effort and you have competent guidance. And that's more or less what I have to say about that, and that's a lot.
Eckhart Tolle made a funny remark yesterday. He talked about the sayings of Jesus, and he said the only people who truly understand the sayings of Jesus are the Buddhists.
Who said that?
Eckhart Tolle.
Huh?
Eckhart Tolle.
A Catholic person?
Eckhart Tolle. Oh, you don't know him? He wrote The Power of Now.
Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah, it's kind of a big pint. Yeah.
I thought you said a Catholic.
A Catholic.
Eckhart.
Yes, that was a Freudian slip.
Were you brought up by Jesuits?
No, I went to Catholic school.
Oh,
so worse, yes.
Okay.